Hey everyone, Dr. Michael Bruce, the sleep doctor here. I am here with a new, very good friend, Dr. Casey Means, author of Good Energy. If you haven't seen that it's on the New York Times bestseller list, you really should go check it out because it's there and it's full of tremendous amounts of information. Casey and I have been able to work together on a few different projects, gracing the stage together on occasion and having some fun. And I just thought there is nobody better than Casey to talk about this whole idea of energy. And we're not talking, by the way, woo-woo California energy, although we are. We're talking about nutrition. We're talking about how these things have an effect. Casey, would you do the audience a quick favor and just give them a little bit of background and how did you get to the point of deciding to write Good Energy?
Absolutely. So I trained in the conventional Western healthcare system, did the thing that every good medical student does, climb that academic ladder, went to Stanford for undergrad and med school, and then trained as an ear, nose, and throat, head and neck surgeon. And I was 4.5 years into my training as a head and neck surgeon, about to take a faculty job after fully launching. And really looked around me at the state of the American healthcare system. And it was just sort of so clear popping up, like it's very broken. And this kind of emerged in my own practice because the patients keep coming back. You do surgery on their nose, you sinus surgery, you might drain the pus from their ears, whatever it is, give them some antacids for their chronic cough, and they just keep coming back. So it was starting to become more and more of a loud signal to me that we're not getting at the root cause in our conventional paradigm. We're not even incentivized to look at the root cause. And I was about 30. I'm a very, sensitive, empathetic person. And so when you're like drilling into someone's skull every day and start to have some of these awakenings, you're thinking, holy moly, is there anything else we could possibly be doing to keep these patients out of the operating room? Is there information that could help make these people actually thrive rather than just be recurring patients? And as I started going down that rabbit hole, some very clear patterns started emerging, like the fact that the vast majority of American adults have the same fundamental issues. We're dealing with blood sugar issues, metabolic dysfunction. Half the country has prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And some of these core problems in our biology are actually linked to every chronic disease that's killing Americans today. And so putting those pieces together, I ultimately left the surgical world and just devoted my life to really helping both understand and share, why are we sick? How do we get better? What is in our control? How do we get to the root cause of what's ailing our population today, which is not doing well? I mean, life expectancy is literally going down in the United States while we spend more than every other developed country in the world. So I'm a seeker of truth. Yeah, I'm on a mission to help people reach their highest purpose. And I've devoted my life to spreading information about really metabolic function, which on this journey for me is the sort of centralizing piece that every person should understand and work to optimize to basically be the foundation of having good health for life.
So you talk a lot about this concept of metabolic health, right? And I think that's I understand what you mean by that, but I'm not convinced that everybody out there kind of understands that. I think that's kind of a new term. Can we double tap on that term and break that down a little bit more? What does metabolic health mean for you?
Yes. So very simply, metabolic health and more broadly, metabolism is how we convert food energy, which is potential energy, into human energy we can use to power this incredible machine of our body made of tens of trillions of cells. So we take in somewhere between 40 and 70 metric tons of food in our lifetime. And food has lots of different, it's a lot of food. It's many football fields, right? And it's 2 to 3 pounds a day on average. That seems a little more like we can wrap our heads around it, but then multiply that by 365 times 80, 90 years, we're looking at many metric tons. And we need to think about food. It's many things, it's pleasure, it's culture, but really it's potential energy that we need to put it through a process to be able to use it as energy to power every single chemical reaction in our body that ultimately our life is the result of all the chemical reactions in our body bubbling up into this human experience. Right now, we have an issue in the United States, which is where the very rapid pace of change of our environment across many different vectors, like real food turning to mostly industrial food, processed food, and we used to sleep more and now we don't.
Right.
I'm speaking to the expert on this.
Right.
There's 70,000 environmental toxins in our food, water, air, and personal care products that didn't exist 50 years ago. A lot has changed in our modern industrial world. And the unique challenge we have at this moment in history is that all of these factors of modernity are crushing the machinery, the mitochondria that converts food energy to human energy. So when you look
have our bodies just not evolved quick enough?
Yeah, I mean, bodies don't evolve that quickly, right? You know, this is a many
takes a couple thousand years.
Yeah, and I don't even, you know, it'll be interesting to see if we can, because so many of the things in our environment now, like the microplastics and the pesticides, they're actually direct mitochondrial toxins. And so when you look at the top 10 things killing Americans today, heart disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, chronic liver disease, cancer, and you actually go deep into the research and look at what's the physiology leading to these conditions, what's actually happening on the level of the cell, not just the symptoms, which all look different. Cancer looks different than Alzheimer's, of course, but what's actually happening inside the cell. What you find is that each of them are related to mitochondrial dysfunction. Again, a breaking or hurting of the machine that converts potential energy to human energy. So our modern Western chronic disease epidemic is fundamentally an underpowering crisis happening in different cell types all over the body. So it's looking like all these different things. It's kind of the great masquerader. And so that's the mission that I'm really, here to share.
What it seems like you're talking about is, so when I think of metabolism, I think of food going through as energy. And what you're also talking about is that system itself has to be healthy. The system of taking the food, processing it, and creating the ATP from it is part of this, not just the input, which we all know we don't want to eat, we want to eat whole foods. We want to eat good stuff. I get that part. But you're also talking about the actual inside me machinery that needs to work well, and I need to be aware of it. And I also need to understand how some of these environmental factors can be affecting my inside machinery a little bit differently. Okay, that's unique and that's important. What kind of metabolic factors do you feel are contributing to disease? Specifically, obesity seems like an easy, kind of softball to throw at you, but I'm also interested in like mental health, things like that.
In terms of what stems out of metabolic dysfunction or what's contributing. Yeah. So it's amazing. And I'll back up because I could just laundry list for the next 5 minutes, the conditions related to metabolic dysfunction. And basically because it's almost everything. Okay. That might seem crazy, but here's a visual. I think, we have 200 cell types in the body, which is so cool because you remember we start as one cell and it's a stem cell, an embryo, and it can turn into over 200 cell types, retinal cells, endothelial cells, hepatocytes, whatever, all these different cells. They all have different jobs based on, so they usually do anything, and that bubbles up into our body. Every single one of those cells needs energy to function, to do its work, to be an organ and do its job. Right. So underpowering in a liver looks totally different than underpowering in the brain. And even within the brain, we have so many different brain cells. Underpowering in an astrocyte versus a glial cell, microglial cell, frontal cortex neuron, it's all going to look different. So when this very base level of the pyramid, which is how we power ourselves, when that's not working well, it can show up as almost any disease, because all diseases and all symptoms they must be the result of cellular dysfunction. You don't have any symptoms or diseases that just arise in a vacuum, right? It has to result from dysfunction. And so a key message I tell people is, in this day and age, with over 90% of people having metabolic dysfunction, I don't actually care what symptom you have or what disease. You should look into metabolic dysfunction as a potential cause. Now, I'm not saying that mitochondrial dysfunction is the cause of every single disease, but it is one of the main causes of dysfunction in the modern world that can look like anything. So to actually now to answer your question very clearly, some of the ones that are more obvious is certainly obesity, right? If we're not funneling potential energy to usable energy, that potential energy is getting stored as fat. There's a block in the mitochondria, the flow's not happening, it gets stored, that's obesity. Type 2 diabetes, that one's obvious as well. If you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you're not turning glucose into ATP, that glucose is going to rise in the bloodstream. That's type 2 diabetes and prediabetes affecting 50% of American adults now and 30% of teens.
Crazy.
It's great. It's 140 million Americans. Then we look at Alzheimer's dementia, now being called type 3 diabetes.
I've heard that.
Yeah. And we're starting to really understand this more neuroenergetic underpinning of Alzheimer's, where actually we've talked a lot about these tau and beta amyloid plaques in the past being the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's, but maybe those are actually almost protective mechanisms in the brain due to a more fundamental problem, which is underpowering, not the actual root of the problem, but a symptom of the problem. So type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's dementia, chronic liver disease. So that is end stage after a sequence of events starting with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is the result of these excess metabolic substrates being stored in liver cells, leading to liver disease. But to kind of talk through some of and then, cancer is a very interesting one because we know that metabolic dysfunction drives many cancers, and the rate of so many cancers is related to underlying diabetes or obesity or metabolic dysfunction risk. But there's ones you wouldn't really think about: depression, anxiety, gout, infertility. The leading cause of infertility in the United States, which is in women, which is rapidly increasing, is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a metabolic disease. Erectile dysfunction is essentially metabolic disease until proven otherwise. Migraine, chronic pain, eczema, acne, premature wrinkles.
The bottom line is whatever is going on with you that you don't think is right, metabolic health plays a role in some way, shape, and form. And we'd be stupid to think that it doesn't, because you've just listed something from every single organ system and almost every type of disease state, right? Where we're seeing this metabolic dysfunction is landing into and creating these diseases and these syndromes. Have you come across stuff specific to sleep in particular and sleep disorders? I would imagine, obviously, that when people are obese, we're starting to walk down that sleep apnea path. When people are depressed and anxious, we're starting to walk down that insomnia path. But I'm super curious, in your experience, are you starting to see, or have you seen people with true metabolic health dysfunction also reporting sleep-related complaints and symptomatology?
Oh, absolutely. There's a intimate and profound bidirectional relationship between sleep disorders and metabolic dysfunction. And so bidirectional because we know that sleep disorders are putting you at much higher risk for metabolic dysfunction. Of course, sleep disruption, sleep loss, sleep inconsistency. I talk in the book about, and I humbly share this information because obviously you got
it all right.
No, but it's the literature clearly shows that there are 3 elements of sleep that directly can lead to metabolic dysfunction. If we skimp on sleep quantity, sleep quality, or sleep consistency, any of those independently can lead to metabolic dysfunction by generating higher cortisol, oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, and even directly mitochondrial dysfunction. You can literally turn someone on a perfect diet, perfect everything. You can turn them pre-diabetic in the course of about a week by shortening their sleep. So
it's pretty amazing.
It's incredible. And so that's one direction, right? That's like these sleep issues leading to metabolic dysfunction. But then the other direction is metabolic dysfunction leading to sleep issues. And that is, I think, more emerging. But if you have type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, you are dealing with higher rates of insomnia. You are dealing with less quality sleep. And of course, because of the associations with obesity, you're dealing more with obstructive sleep apnea, which is affecting a huge percentage of the country and is going to be shorten your life, of course. And so it's under talked. It's starting to be talked about more for sure. But to have optimal metabolic health, you have to have optimal sleep. That is just the reality.
Here's what's funny to me about you and your path is you started out as an ENT surgeon, which, by the way, sleep apnea is an ENT problem. It is between your nose and your throat. And you didn't decide to go into surgery. You went into this whole cool idea of metabolic health. And now you're still treating sleep apnea at the end of it all, because you're helping people with their weight and you're helping people with their metabolic function and all of these things. So I may have to give you the honorary sleep doctor degree, sleep specialist degree, because you're doing some cool stuff. And to be fair, you've been on this path for a while. I mean, maybe it just took a sleep doctor to notice that you really wanted to be a sleep doctor. I think you do. But that's just me. Now I've got another question for you. I've been looking through your book and you talk about connections, not silos. And I think it's a very important concept that we're kind of been talking around that idea here. I'd love for you to double tap on that. Why do you not like silos and why do you like connections?
Yeah. So when we're talking about the healthcare system and even the way we learn about biology from kindergarten, it's all about these systems. You know, you've got the heart and the liver and the spleen and the gut and the brain. It's all different. That is so built in. It's hard to even step back from it and realize we're one body. We're one body with cells that all came from one cell, and anything that's happening in one part of the body is being experienced by the whole body in some way through hormones, neurotransmitters, our cardiovascular, how much our blood vessels are constricting or contracting. We're learning so much more in recent history about how the gut basically controls everything. You know, the microbiome in our gut is controlling our thoughts, our mood, our sleep, our motivation. And so it's all connected. But what we have done is we have siloed and specialized. We now have over 100 medical and surgical specialties in Western medicine. And the fascinating thing is, the more we have specialized, the sicker we are getting in this country.
Yeah. We don't talk to each other. It's ridiculous. Like, it's unbelievable. When I talk to a patient, I'm like, hey, can I talk with your doctor? They're like, no doctor's ever asked to talk to my doctor. Yeah. You know, it's like,
Isn't that amazing?
It's awful. Like, if we could just have a team approach, that would be so much better.
And it's an incentive problem, because the way that healthcare is financed is it's fundamentally fee for service. And if you can get people all ignoring that there are a pretty small set of root causes that lead to most diseases, you can basically treat symptoms rather than cellular physiology. And you can send one patient to 15 specialists and have 15 different billing codes. And each of those doctors is taking home a paycheck, versus the more like functional medicine approach or physiology-based approach, which says, hey, you do have these 20 symptoms. You've got the arthritis, you've got the prostate pain, you've got the sinus issues, you've got some brain fog, your vision's getting worse, all these things. But when we look at your biomarkers, fundamentally, you've got some chronic inflammation going on, you've got some oxidative stress, you've got some metabolic dysfunction, and we're going to clean those things up and see what happens with all these symptoms. Very different approach and much less profitable for the system. So that's more of the the unified approach that our system needs to get to. And, for anyone who feels like that sounds hippy dippy, there's a fancy term for it that is in all the literature. It's called network and systems biology. And it's essentially looking at what are the connecting points in the physiology of disease. Now, it's not totally nefarious and purely financial, why we've come to look at the body this way. It's very damaging, but it's not purely nefarious. What's so interesting is that when back in time, when we could only really understand and diagnose people based on their symptoms, because we didn't have the microscopes or the gene sequencing or the PCR or the metabolomics. We didn't have all these tools to know what was happening on the invisible level, the physiology level. So people would come in, and of course you'd say, of course arthritis is different than Alzheimer's, and of course hypertension is different than a migraine, because they look totally different based on what we could see. But now we can see so much more, and we know that inside the body, it's the same stuff happening in different parts of the body, and we need to start treating at that level. That's at the mitochondrial level. That's at the cell signaling level. And so that's the call to action. So this book is so much more than just, it's so important to help people take ownership over their own metabolic health, because the system isn't doing it. But it's really a call to action for a update to the operating system of healthcare to modernize clinical practice with what we know about cellular biology, which is that there are these core pathways driving most disease.
So here's the problem, right? I'm a concerned patient. I'm out there and I'm listening to this conversation and I'm saying, she's right. She's 100% correct. What do I do? Like, how do I address this? Because to be fair, I don't see there being an overhaul of the healthcare system anytime soon. In fact, I would argue Medicare is going to go broke based on diabetes alone, probably reasonably soon, unless we get somebody to intervene with a lot of dough quickly. So how do some of because the people that are interested in sleep are interested in health. And that's what we're talking about here is we're talking about real health. We're not just talking about sleep health. We're talking about overall body health. So if people are out there thinking to themselves, okay, what should I do? Step number one, go buy good energy. I'm going to be very straightforward with you. Like, this is the blueprint for how you can start to do a lot of these things. The good news is that you don't have to do them all by yourself. And there's a lot of different tools and assessments and things that can go on out there. But help walk us through maybe some of the simple, like, where's the starting line for this for folks? Because I think people really want to do it, but it's like, what do I talk to my doctor about?
I think step one is you have to know where you stand on the metabolic spectrum. You got to know where you stand, because the most recent literature, American College of Cardiology, suggests that 93% of us American adults have some metabolic dysfunction. And I don't think if we're at a dinner party, maybe in LA, this would be different, but and you say to people, you ask them to rattle off their metabolic biomarkers and tell you point blank, do you have metabolic dysfunction or not? Most people absolutely are not going to be able to tell you. We can tell you, how much our car payment is every month. We can tell you how much savings we have, but we somehow can't talk about the core foundational level of our health. So the amazing thing is that there's a couple simple biomarkers that most doctors will order that can help you understand if you're in that criteria of metabolic dysfunction. It's all totally outlined in my book, but you're looking at biomarkers like triglycerides, hemoglobin A1C, which is a sort of 90-day average of glucose, a fasting glucose level, HDL cholesterol, a couple ratios that you're going to do, like total cholesterol to HDL ratio, triglyceride to HDL ratio, and then actually non-blood markers, blood pressure and waist circumference. And so
this doesn't sound hard.
It's not hard. These, if you had to pay out of pocket for these, it would be like $50. But the way that metabolic dysfunction, and I will say, with lab testing and imaging about really understanding the complete picture of metabolic dysfunction, the sky's the limit. I mean, we're talking DEXA scans and, fasting insulin, continuous glucose monitoring. There's a lot you can do. But those basics right there are basically how we define metabolic syndrome, the ones that I just mentioned. So every single person, at least 3 to 4 times a year, should be getting those done. And knowing exactly how they're tracking and be able to rattle them off like you'd be able to rattle off your phone number. That is just the reality of it. So what's your most recent fasting glucose? Someone should be able to say 84 milligrams per deciliter. What was your most recent triglyceride? 52 milligrams per deciliter. What was your most recent HDL? 88. Like that type of, and I do absolutely.
I don't think I know anybody that can do that unless they're a physician.
You can. Do you know some of those?
I don't actually. So, I'm thinking, holy cow, I need to go talk to Casey.
Well, if you knew that having a higher triglyceride to HDL ratio would increase your depression risk by 3 times, like you'd want to know that,
Absolutely.
Or that, these things track with all-cause mortality and heart disease. And again, it's like, this is the basics, but they can tell you a lot. So if I see someone with, and all the optimal ranges are in the book, but if I see someone with a fasting glucose of 82, less than 100 is generally considered normal. And a triglyceride of 45, less than 150 is considered normal. A high HDL, we want higher HDL, it's quote unquote good cholesterol, of like in the 80s, and a hemoglobin A1C of 5%, which is less than the threshold for prediabetes, which is 5.7%. And their blood pressure is 110/60. I'm looking at that person, I'm like, this person has significantly, and I mean like hugely lower risk of developing every single disease that's killing Americans today. Not to mention depression, anxiety, sleep issues, gout, migraine, fibromyalgia, infertility, erectile dysfunction, all of it. And so that is why it's powerful, is because we know there's an association between every one of those biomarkers and the risk of chronic disease. And they are all totally actionable in 2 to 3 months with simple behavior change tactics. So, I mean, I've seen people's triglycerides drop from 300 to 70 in 6 months just by changing their diet a little bit. And so you got to know, because we're getting bad advice and mixed advice from all sides. Everyone's confused about nutrition. Everyone's confused about what exercise to do. So it's 1, define where you are. 2, be super honest about where you stand on that metabolic spectrum. Make a few changes to the evidence-based areas that we can control in our own daily life and recheck in 3 months. If they're moving in the right direction, keep doing that stuff and double down. If they're not moving in the right direction, we should be shifting gears and trying something different. It's a rapid iteration cycle that can easily lead you in the right direction.
Well, so one of the things that people can take a hold of is what food they eat, right? Like that's one of the biggies that are out there. And you talk, I mean, the term has been going around a lot in the last few years about mindful eating, but you have a little bit of a different idea set and spin around mindful eating. Why don't you tell us, like, what is mindful eating and how do people find the awe in food?
Well, I am personally in awe of food. And one of the things I want to spread in the world is to really make other people see the magic of food, and understand how important it is to spend more time with this incredible substance. Like, when we think about our bodies, you know, we are mostly made from food, right? All the atoms that make up our body, they're constantly coming from food and being replaced. The body, I think most people might know this, but maybe not, that, you know, the body we have today atomically, the atoms and molecules in our body, is completely different from 6 months ago or a year ago, because we're
even 3 months ago in some muscle turnover.
Well, and in certain organ systems like the gut and the skin, it's completely turned over, all new molecular structure in the course of 6 weeks to 2 months. So we are there's this beautiful Taoist statement that I love, which is that life is not an entity, it's a process. We in the Western paradigm, we're obsessed with this idea that, like, I'm Casey and you're Michael, I'm a thing and you're a thing, I'm living and then I'm dying. But under the microscope, none of that is true, right? If we could just see better, we'd realize we're this swirling hive of atoms that is constantly in flux with the environment around us. And one of the big ways it's in flux is because we take in these 2 to 3 pounds of atoms per day in food, and we're replacing and replenishing our body. And if we put in, it's such a hopeful message, because if we put in good inputs and the right bricks to build the structure that needs to be built for function, in the course of days, weeks, months, we can rebuild a functional body. I mean, that's incredible. And so I love that about food. I also just love, on the more cosmic level, it's like, you know, ultimately every cell in our body needs constant source of energy in the form of this molecule called ATP, the mitochondria make for energy. And the difference between life and death is whether we have ATP or not. So metabolism is the process of, you know, our life force. And that comes from food, the food that we eat. But the food, the energy that we're actually transforming and liberating when we eat is actually solar energy. It's food from the sun. And so it's energy from the sun. So photons travel 92 million miles through space, and they get absorbed by chloroplasts in plants. And plants have the miraculous capability of taking light energy from the sun and turning it into the carbon-carbon bonds in starches and sugars that either we eat or animals that we eat. And truly, what mitochondrial function really means on a bigger picture, awe-inspiring level, is that we're liberating the sun's energy to power our thoughts, feelings, lives.
That's kind of cool. That's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah. And, you know, we're, as you know, being a sleep doctor, like, we are very much, our biology is regulated by the sun and by light, but we're also energized by light. And what's really crazy is that both our DNA and our mitochondria emit their own photons as well, a very weak photon energy. So we are light beings. That's just the reality. And one thing that makes me sort of very sad about the metabolic crisis is, more than being a clinical entity, I think there's something kind of sad and dark about the fact that by hurting our mitochondria through the changes that have happened in this modern urban industrial world, we're actually blocking our ability to transform light energy into human energy. And I think when we think about the nature of our bodies through this much more like we're these miraculous beings that have self-assembled out of the universe to be this form for a short period of time that can transform light energy to thought and consciousness, it makes me feel more empowered to choose to put good food on my plate, because this is a miraculous experience we're getting to have. It's once an eternity. It's a privilege, and food is the thing that determines whether that process is functional. And so we should honor food in that way. We should treat our soil with immense respect, since it's doing the miraculous capability of turning light into something we can actually use. And we should truly look at food as the reality we're going to have tomorrow, a week from now, a year from now, because that's what it is. And so that's one of the ways I the book, my favorite part of the book is this sort of meditation on finding on food. Because I think when you start from the level of weight or like longevity, it'll only get you so far. Yeah. I think when you start from the place of like knowing that you're a miracle, and that, and that you're in constant conversation with food, it helps make eating healthily a lot easier.
I could see that. I tell you something that I think a lot of my audience members struggle with. I struggle with it too, is what is the difference between processed and unprocessed?
Yeah.
Right. Because it's like I go into the grocery store and the things that say healthy are actually processed half the time, or they've got stuff in them that I think is supposed to be healthy, but maybe it's not. Are there some definitions or some ways, shapes, and forms that we can walk into a grocery store and know what is an unprocessed piece of food? And I'm not saying this to be facetious. I'm not being silly about it. I'm like, I get it. The vegetable aisle is unprocessed. Like, yes. I get that part. But like all the stuff in the middle, that's where I'm worried.
Totally. Yeah. So there is a classification system called the NOVA classification system, which basically tells you from unprocessed, minimally processed, processed, and ultra processed. Okay. And then there's processed culinary ingredients, which would be more like salt and sugar and things like that, like spices. Mm-hmm. And so what we know about the research is that as you move from unprocessed to minimally processed to ultra processed, it becomes more lethal. And so there is no possible healthy diet that comes from an ultra processed diet in this particular day and age. Ultra processed food is a science experiment of the past 75 years that has failed.
What's an example of that?
So I'll talk about what ultra processed food is. So the way to think about it is that it's the category in which a whole food has been broken down and not just mushed or squished or mixed with other things, but still has all its components, but where individual components of the food have been separated out. So let's take a wheat kernel, for instance. You have a wheat kernel, and literally just like holding a wheat kernel in your hand, that would be an unprocessed food. Like you pick it up off the ground. You would never really eat that. Right. Minimally processed might be like grinding that into a powder, but it includes all the same components that was in that original wheat, the bran, the germ, the endosperm, all of it. Mm-hmm. And then processed is like, okay, you're going to mix that with other ingredients and maybe bake a whole grain bread. That's processed bread, but all the individual components are there. Ultra processed is when you take that pulverized wheat and you start separating out the endosperm and the bran and the germ into separate buckets, and then take the individual molecular components of food that never, ever were meant to be separated in nature and start pairing those with other individual constituent parts from other foods to build a frankenfood that never, ever could have gone together in nature, presenting your body with something totally foreign. And it's essentially a science experiment. So it's using technology, chemicals, and really modern machinery to pull apart on the molecular level the individual components of food to rebuild them with other things. So this is when you start getting into like Pop-Tart territory.
I was going to say, like, are we talking Cheez-Its here? What are we talking about?
Cheez-Its, Pop-Tarts. Well, I'll make it very simple. If it's because it's obviously complicated, but basically like if it has white flour, any industrially refined seed oil. So seed oils are made in factories through chemical extraction. So this is like canola oil, vegetable oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, peanut oil,
Oh, wow.
or ultra processed refined sugar. So there's 55 names for sugar. You should Google that and look it up because there's a lot of different names. But if it has one of those 3 ingredients, it is an ultra processed food.
Oh,
So
okay.
if it has white flour, it's an ultra processed food because that flour is basically it's a super ultra refined. The bran and all the fibrous elements have been taken away to just give you the drug-like white endosperm part that is
So like a potato chip would be almost ultra processed because there's still some semblance of a potato in there somewhere.
But it's ultra processed because it's been deep fried in industrial refined seed oil.
Got it. Okay, right there. So, got it. So
if you just keep those 3 ingredients in mind, which I call the unholy trinity, you will avoid almost all ultra processed food.
So white flour, any oils, and what was the third one?
Added sugar.
Added sugar.
Yeah.
Got it. Wow.
Industrially refined added sugar. So this would be high fructose corn syrup, white sugar. There's a million names for it though.
Yeah. No, I get that.
That basically eliminates the entire middle of the grocery store. There are, of course, exceptions. There are exceptions. So here's an exception that I think is important, like help people understand. So one of my favorite little snacks is called flackers, which are flax crackers. They come in a bag. They're made in a factory, but they're not ultra processed. The reason being, you look at the label. What are the ingredients? Whole flax seeds, apple cider vinegar, salt, water. So you look at the cracker. It's just basically whole flax seeds glued together by apple cider vinegar and then baked. That is somewhere between a minimally processed and a processed food, but is absolutely part of a healthful diet. Now, if they had taken that flaxseed and pulled it apart through chemicals and technology and taken one constituent part and then put it in some sort of cake, then it goes into ultra processed territory. But mixing together otherwise intact but pulverized foods can still be part of a healthful diet. It's when you start playing science with it and pulling things apart into things that would never be found in nature that you start getting into the dangerous, really inflammatory territory.
Yeah, I'm sure. And like all these food scientists that are out there that are creating all this stuff, they're not necessarily creating stuff that's good, right? They're creating stuff that sells or that tastes good, but may or may not be good for you. We were talking about light before, and I know you have a beef against Thomas Edison and the light bulb. So I'd like to hear a little bit more because I think Thomas Edison completely messed sleep up for everyone when he invented the light bulb. Because then you could do overtime work and work when it was dark out. Yeah. So I have a big beef with Mr. Edison. How about yourself?
I'm glad we're aligned. Yes, I do think in many ways the invention of the light bulb was one of the most deadly progresses we've had in human history, because what's happened is that you've taken an organism that is extremely light sensitive and whose core biology and all body systems are controlled by light through our chronobiology, and we're diurnal, as you know, and we are meant to have certain biology on during light and certain biology on during dark. And with that one invention, you threw
everything
millions of years to the wind. You said we are going to ignore the fact that we are light sensitive organisms whose biology is dictated by light and just say, we think that quote unquote productivity or even convenience, and comfort is more important than health. And it's not only affecting humans. Our light pollution is having a huge impact on so many different animal species who also use light to control their biology and their movement and their mating and all of these things. And so I think So that's one, is just chronobiology. It's totally screwed up our chronobiology. We no longer are in sync with having a diurnal cycle. In many ways, we haven't even flip-flopped the diurnal cycle. We've just kind of like hacked at all of it. We've got a little bit of light blaring in the middle of the night. We are not getting any sunlight during the day because we're inside all the time. Right. The average American, it's a mess. And the average American is actually inside 93% of the day. And so that means that we are not even getting close to the amount of photon energy that we need to tell our bodies to do the daytime biologic activities. I think on a deeper level, one of the reasons why it really bothers me as well is because humans, especially women, are cyclical beings. And there are a lot of sort of poles in the natural world. There's night and there's day. There's hot and there's cold.
Sure.
We have the tides that have multiple cycles. We've got the moon cycle. We've got the menstrual cycle. When you brought the light bulb in, basically what we started doing was saying that cycles aren't important. And in thinking that there was a hubris that happened saying that we believe we can outsmart nature and basically have constant yang and that we don't need any more yin anymore. But when you start breaking natural cycles, like you will never have the last laugh. And that's basically what we're seeing right now with the depression, the anxiety, the chronic disease. We have said, oh, industrial agriculture, we don't need 4 seasons. It's going to be summer all the time. We're going to make these crops grow all year round. Well, what's happening? Like we have a hugely fragile food system. The same thing's happening with women. Infertility is off the charts. We need to respect that maximum quote unquote productivity comes from living in harmony with our cycles, whether that's night and day or, 4 seasons, whatever, and not trying to outsmart it because it's not working. So that's the other reason.
Makes sense. That makes sense. All right. So in the sleep universe, there are lots of tracking technologies, right? We've got Oura rings, we've got Whoop straps, you've got yours. We've got all of this stuff. In your universe, I know that you have thought long and hard about tracking, continuous glucose monitoring, things of that nature. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the importance of that and how can we understand it and maybe where's the starting line with some of those types of tracking devices? Because I feel like a lot of consumers can get very confused very quickly.
Yeah. So step 1 is the lab tests that I mentioned earlier. They're cheap. They're easy. They're not going to set you back a lot in terms of cost. Your doctor will order them. That's great. As we start to get into some higher level, trackers, you start to meet a lot of roadblocks. They're expensive. Your doctor may not order it for you because they don't think it's needed. These continuous glucose monitors, I have one on right now. They are prescription only still in the United States. And so there's barriers, but so when I went on my journey towards sort of metabolic evangelism after the surgical world, I co-founded a company called Levels, which consumerizes access to what was formerly a medical device for diabetics called a continuous glucose monitor, with the vision being that 50% of American adults now have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. Almost all of these cases are preventable. So this is crazy. We have a device that tells us our blood sugar 24 hours a day in real time, that we could learn how to eat properly and how to manage our blood sugar and see things coming around the corner. And we've got a public health crisis causing literally trillions of dollars of expenditures a year. Why don't we give people access to this clinical technology earlier in life so they can track their blood sugar over time and learn how to eat properly? It seems so obvious. This was 5 years ago when it seemed really radical. Now it's definitely becoming more mainstream, but that's what we did. And what you can do so anyone without a prescription can monitor their blood sugar by pricking their finger, but you can only get a few data points per day unless you're pricking all the time. The cool thing about a continuous glucose, it's painful. Yeah. A continuous glucose monitor, it's painless. You put it on, it's just it's like a adhesive, looks like a quarter that you stick on the back of your arm, and it's constantly sending your blood sugar to your phone 24 hours a day. You wear it for 10 to 14 days, and you're basically getting a movie of one of the most key metabolic biomarkers in your body. So the way you use this is, okay, I was told by this influencer or this doctor that this breakfast is super healthy for me, but I don't feel great after it, and I'm not losing weight, and I'm not having the results I want. Well, you put a glucose monitor on, you might see that it's shooting you up 100 glucose points, which is a lot. That would be very big. And then you're crashing down afterwards. You want to keep it more to like 20 or 30 rise after meals. So in that one moment,
people want to stay below 100. Is that correct?
Well, not throughout the whole day. For fasting glucose, which is when you haven't eaten anything for 8 hours, you definitely want to be below 100, ideally like in the 70 to 85 range. But after a meal, you are going to naturally go up a little bit because there's going to be some level of carbohydrates usually in your meal, and that's normal. And having like gentle rolling hills that go up and down through the day, that's great. What happens for most Americans, because the average American eats 11 times per day, and we're eating these ultra processed diets of refined carbs and sugars, is we're having these huge spikes in glucose. And what happens after a big spike in glucose because of ultra processed food that has no fiber in it is our body secretes all of this insulin to soak up all that glucose, and then you crash. And so you're basically on a roller coaster, and that does not feel good. So you can use these devices to learn how to pair meals well, like add more protein, add more fiber to balance the carbohydrates. You can learn simple tricks like I need to walk after a meal to bring my blood sugar down, or if I don't get enough sleep, my blood sugar is way higher the next day, which is exactly what we see on glucose data. If I pull an all-nighter for my book deadline, my glucose looks pre-diabetic the next day. It's crazy. So we know all this from the research, but it's about seeing it in your own body and also remembering that we're all biochemically different. And what might cause a huge glucose reaction for you may cause no glucose reaction for me, and vice versa. So learning what actually works for your own body.
That's the thing that I think baffles so many people, right? I think because every time I talk with people about this particular issue, they're like, oh, well, bananas have got a high glycemic index, so I can't eat bananas. And I'm like, does it have a high glycemic index for you? Like help me understand that part. And nobody knows what that means, and they haven't really thought about it. So what you're suggesting, which sounds actually like almost like a DIY, right? Like a do-it-yourself, is you could go to a company like a Levels, get this glucose monitor on you, and then you could look at what does your sugar look like after you eat a particular meal. And if you don't get the nice rolling hills, so let's say it goes to 120, 130, it should nicely come back down. It shouldn't go, to 170 because or 200, because that means you're having a glucose reaction to that particular. So that's how people should start to do it. So just because my wife can eat a banana and have no glucose spike doesn't mean that I can eat a banana and have no glucose spike, even though banana is a whole food that's healthy and has natural sugar, right?
Right. Yeah. And
that's the complex.
It is. And there was an amazing paper. It's been a while now. It was 2015 in Cell called Personalized Nutrition by Prediction of Glycemic Responses. And they put CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, on 800 healthy people, and they fed them standardized meals, and people were all over the place. Some people had no response. Some people had huge responses. They actually gave people identically sized bananas and cookies, standardized, and people had equal and opposite reactions between the two things. So there would be like person A would have a huge spike to the banana and no spike to the cookie, and person B would be the opposite. So then what they did, which was so cool, is they looked at all the individual biologic characteristics that could determine why people would be different. And they came up with dozens. One of the biggest ones was the microbiome. Like, what is going on in your gut, and how is the gut eating that food before you eat it? But also things like insulin sensitivity, sleep, previous physical activity the day before. There were other biologic factors as well. So we're all different. And I think, for anyone getting started, I really feel so strongly that do not get hung up on this. If you move from an ultra processed diet to a whole foods diet of any kind, your life will be better. So I don't think the average person should be stressing about whether they spike to a banana or not if they're moving off of an ultra processed diet. Where I think it can be really helpful is if you are trying to move towards a healthier dietary pattern, what you'll often find is as you eat more natural foods, your glucose really improves quite a bit. And then we've had members in Levels who have lost 80, 100 pounds who have been trying to lose weight for years. This is a population who they may have tried every diet under the sun, but what for them actually, there were maybe particular, even if they were quote unquote healthy whole foods that were spiking them and keeping them kind of stuck. And so they're maybe modulating which types of foods they're eating, even if they're all, I'm a believer in whole foods, all whole foods. So I don't want to get people to think don't eat a banana. It's not to scare. It's more use it as a tool for where you are in life, basically. And just like with any tool, it can be used well, it can be used not well. But something I've learned that's been really fascinating is like there are categories of food like fruit. And the reality is for my body, there are certain fruits that don't spike me, and there are certain fruits that spike me a ton. And I like all the fruits the same. So for me, I'm like, okay, if cantaloupe and grapes are causing a huge spike, but oranges and apples and pears aren't, I'm just going to stick with oranges and apples and pears. I don't care. I like them all. But I know that I'm going to basically be having a better situation with the ones that don't spike me as much, because when I spike and crash, I don't feel good. I feel tired. I feel anxious. And so that's a nice way to use it if you're eating a mostly whole foods diet, is like take a food category like grains or fruits and see which ones have the best response for you. Because over time, it's better to have less glycemic variability. So yeah.
Does it change over time, like as we get older?
It does. I mean, insulin sensitivity tends to go down as we age. So that's why it's also such a wonderful tool to kind of get these touch points throughout your life of how your glucose dynamics are. Because now that I've used one for on and off for 5 years, if I put one on when I'm 50, I'm 36 now, I will know whether that pattern is different from what my ideal state is. I go up, I come down quickly. If I start seeing like, okay, I'm going up and now I'm like trailing off and it's taking a long time to come down, that would be a sign to me that that might be early insulin resistance. So knowing your baseline and how it changes over time is important. But getting back to the concept of figuring out your own personalized glycemic index for different foods, what's also fascinating is that like your glycemic index for different foods in your body can change day to day. In my luteal phase of the cycle, I'm more insulin resistant. All women are more insulin resistant in the second half of their cycle than the first half. How crazy is that? So literally the glycemic index of a banana for me is different.
It depends on when you eat it.
When you eat it. Or if I've done resistance training the day before, I may be super primed to take up glucose, or if I've had good sleep. So it's all about, it's not about control in my mind. And I've been thinking about this for years now, but like, it's about engendering curiosity about how cool your body is and how simple strategies like sleep consistency, going to bed earlier to get more deep sleep, walking for 10 minutes after meals, taking deep breaths throughout the day to keep your cortisol down can have a profound impact on your metabolic biology.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% correct. It is so fascinating. I remember you and I were talking with another physician fairly recently, and we all kind of said, how many times is a patient going to walk through the door and say, I'm not eating any carbs, I'm only eating protein, I'm exercising daily, and I haven't lost a pound, doc. What's going wrong, right? I think that's the big thing that's out there. And I feel like Good Energy has got some of those answers. Like this internal curiosity, I think, is really where people need to start spending more time, because we're no longer in a world where you can just go get some generic treatment and it's going to work. Like, I'm sorry, like I wish it was like that, like it used to be back in like the 30s and 40s. But by the way, sleep is very different now than it was in the 30s and the 40s. Just like metabolism is now very different than it was in the 30s and 40s. And so with all these cool, new, technical, complicated things that we get to live our lives with that make our lives better, we also have to, I think, appreciate, and I think that's what you're telling me and the audience, is we've also kind of got to look at the inside and the technical that's going on there and really start to, the numbers don't lie, right? Like you've got to start keeping track. I mean, like you said, people probably know what is in their bank account to the penny, but they will have almost no idea what their, cholesterol looks like or triglycerides look like. So that makes intuitive sense to me.
I'll be honest, like in our household, we do get our blood work done every 3 to 4 months. I use an amazing company called Function Health, which you can avoid begging your doctor, for basically basic lab tests. And for like $500 a year, you get 109 biomarkers done twice. And you can, use HSA and FSA. So we're doing that. And I change our eating, like our food purchasing, pretty much after every lab draw. Like I will make subtle adjustments, like and I will make subtle adjustments to what I'm doing for working out, but it's like this, we are dynamic entities. And I'm a very like crunchy, holistic person. I'm not sort of a tech obsessed person. I want to be outside, but the reality is that we're up against a lot in the modern world. Yeah. And that is why I think there's a place in this moment in time. I mean, we're not only up against a lot in terms of the sleep deprivation and the environmental toxins and the sugars and everything, but also just, I think, so much information coming at us. One day it's veganism's the best. The next day it's carnivore is the best. So if you can basically, the purpose of the book is, there's a chapter that says, trust yourself, not your doctor. And it's not meant to be scary, but it's meant to be, we now have the power, the tools, and the information for every person. And I think above a 5th grade level to basically like fully understand the core biology that can keep us well. And I cannot say the vegan diet is best or the keto diet is best. Right. I can't, because I don't know someone's biology. People should understand how they feel. Well, and that's the other piece. This is not, and you'll see in the book, people who read it, it's like, this is not just about your biomarkers. The biggest part of the equation is slowing down enough from the distraction industrial complex we live in to actually just tune in with your own body. How in God's name do you feel? Like, do you feel good? Right. Do you have symptoms? Like, that's our best biomarker. Do you wake up with joy and energy? And really tune in enough to be able to track that. How do you feel? I know so many women and men who are so busy that I don't even know if they know how they feel, they just, and so, and then there's the biomarker level, and together you can put together a pretty good personalized, plan for your life yourself. And then your doctor can really be there for acute issues and to be your coach if things are developing that you can't figure out on your own. And so that's kind of the vision that I think we're moving towards. And it's one of empowerment, because we should not be handing over all our health agency to another person. It's our own body, And so I think that's a part of it as well.
Well, at the end of the day, when patients do that, they hand over all of that health agency to somebody else. Like, that other person is at a complete disadvantage because they're missing one of the most core components, which is how do you feel? Like, how do you feel? Right? Yeah. As you were discussing, one of my big things that I ask people on my sleep diaries, I'm the only person who has a sleep diary that asks, how do you feel in the morning? Yes. Because that's what's most important, right? If you wake up and you feel great, I think I'm pretty much okay with just about anything that you did. But if you wake up and you feel like crap, that is a signal. Like, trust me on this one. People are not supposed to feel like crap when they wake up. They're supposed to feel good. And I think that holds true with food. I was talking with a friend of mine in the sauna this morning, and he said something to me which was really interesting. He said, one guy was talking about how he's having a hard time stopping eating certain things because they taste so good. And this other gentleman was sitting next to me and he's saying, I only eat things, I don't care what things taste like. I care about what I feel like after I eat. Oof. Right. And I was like, that's it. Like, that's exactly the problem is in this society, we're so focused on how does this taste in the moment? Yeah. That is gone within seconds. And now all of the repercussions of that good tasting thing, which, don't get me wrong, I love ice cream. Okay. Like, I do. I can't help it. I just do. Like, who doesn't love ice cream? But at the end of the day, right? Like, it doesn't make me feel good when I eat it. It tastes good, but afterwards I'm logy, I'm tired, I want to lay down. Like, I don't like, none of that is good for me. And so I think you're really talking about the crux of that. And I think people can be a good meter of that, of themselves, right? If you are listening to this conversation and any part of it has rung true for you, it's probably a good idea to take a look. Right? Yes. Look at the 7 things that you're talking about, Casey. Get the book Good Energy, because it's going to explain them all to you and how to make the calculations. And by the way, it's not particularly hard, but it is very well mapped out so that you can actually follow a process. So it's easy for you to do. I required that, even though I have pretty extensive medical knowledge. I like things that move quickly and kind of get me the information that I'm looking for. And are you also an advocate for, like, do you think that people should get the CGM, the continuous glucose monitoring, or should they wait on that read the book first, kind of see where they are, and then start making more active? Because a lot of people listening to this will be like, okay, I can get some data. I'm going to jump in there and pull it on. How do you think people should proceed?
I mean, I think the sequence of events would be if you have a doctor that you have a decent relationship with.
Right. Step one.
Immediately send them a message to the electronic health record to order you a new set of labs, and then make sure to include the ones that I mentioned earlier. Full cholesterol panel, hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose. Make sure you know your waist circumference and your blood pressure. I'd also ask them to add on an HSCRP, which is inflammation, vitamin D.
Can you tell people what that means? HRCRP?
High sensitivity CRP, C-reactive protein, is a general inflammatory marker in the body that's really helpful. But if you're writing them, just throw in a few extras that they'll probably order. Vitamin D. There's a lot more that I like, but the doctor would probably then write back and be like, oh, we need to talk more about this. So those are the basics. Step 2, I would buy the book so that you have it when you get their lab results back and can interpret optimal ranges. And then I would say that the next step is do the function health, which is basically the big biomarker panel, and get a CGM. Like if we're talking just biowearables, I personally, I know, and I am a big believer in sleep tracking. I know that I love how you do, paper and analog, because I think it is really important. Yeah. But if people have no clue about their steps or their sleep, like I would say basically CGM, function health, and an Oura ring are, for me, like the basic.
Yeah, you can
learn
get a
your
lot
body
done
over
with
the
that data.
next month. You will learn. It'll send you on a path of curiosity for the rest of your life, and I think, and you'll know more about your health than you did over every doctor's visit you've ever had in your life. And so to me, that's the trio of things I would start with. So levels for a month, a big biomarker panel with the functional medicine interpretations, which is function, and then an Oura ring. And then the next thing I would do after that is, if your doctor's really not participating with you in a deeper level conversation about metabolic health and about actionable ways to improve your health, if they're really pushing drugs and the short visits and they're not making you feel heard, I would try and find more of a functional or precision medicine doctor.
I agree.
So go to ifm.org, look at the provider directory for doctors who have this framework in your area. Many take insurance. You could look online at Parsley Health, which is a digital functional medicine group. Consider a naturopathic doctor, but basically find someone who's going to go on this journey with you and won't roll their eyes when you say, I have a CGM and I have an Oura ring. And that happens sometimes. And it's really upsetting, if your doctor's not taking this proactiveness seriously. So basically find a new doctor.
Yeah. I had somebody tell me, I was talking to a patient yesterday, and I was describing the procedure, and he said, yeah, I talked to my doctor, and I told him that I was tired all the time. And he said, so am I. Tough it out. Like, that was the real response. It was like, grow up, like, tough it. I'm like, what, are you kidding me? Like, that is not the right response. So no. I think there's a lot, and nothing against the physicians that are out there, but there are a lot of people who just don't have the knowledge, that haven't bothered to study, that have been so immersed in this horrible healthcare system that they can't even pull their head up to figure out what's good for their patients or not. So if you've got a doctor like that, just find another one. There are other doctors. IFM is a great resource for people to go to. That's another great one. All right, Casey, last question, because I know you got to go. Tell me about your sleep. So what is your evening routine like? And you can tell all the bad stuff, because everybody here knows that I sleep with 2 French bulldogs in the bed, and I have a big screen TV on almost all night long, because that is how my wife can sleep. Yeah.
Wow.
It's all there. It's all out in the open.
I love knowing that. So definitely I'm one of those people who my sleep routine starts first thing in the morning, which is I go outside and I spend almost all day outdoors. I have a standing desk right outside my office right here. And unless I'm doing a podcast, I'm pretty much working with outdoors, because I want my body to know that it's daytime. That's my goal. Then at night, we turn the lights low, and we have some Amazon red lights that we basically can turn on with our phone that are all over the house. So we try and dim the lights. Cool. It's nice. They're like the mood. $50. Yeah. but keep the blue light out of the home. We try to watch sunset as another way to signal to the body that it's nighttime. Yep. And then I take a whole bunch of sleep supplements, to be honest. I take magnesium, L-theanine.
We should talk about it.
Yes. For me, what really helps me, and maybe it's at this point placebo effect, but I take magnesium, 3 and 8. I take L-theanine, apigenin, sometimes a little bit of GABA, and basically just take that about an hour before bed. And then we go to bed we're trying to go to bed between like 9:30 and 10. I am a former very late night owl, a wolf, I think.
You're a wolf.
I'm a wolf. Yeah. But given that we're moving towards having kids and there's going to be earlier mornings, and my partner is what's the very early morning one? A bear.
Lion.
He's a lion.
Mm-hmm.
He's full lion. I'm trying to move towards lion, which is actually, and the way we've done that is we basically 5 days a week sign up for a 6:30 a.m. workout class. And for me to be mentally and physically healthy, I need 7.5 hours of sleep confirmed on my wearable. And so that means we go to bed at 9:30. And so that's sort of, and then the best part of the evening routine is that when we go to sleep, we listen to a 5-minute adorable, basically like adult lullaby meditation through Inside Tracker. And it's this woman, we know it by heart at this point, but it's essentially like a mom talking to a kid being like, you've had an amazing day. Like, like very sweet and slow and soothing. The second that's over, we are both comatose and ready to sleep. And then I put in earplugs, and we have blackout shades, but I do sleep with earplugs every single night. I cannot sleep without earplugs, which is kind of a problem. And then we have an 8-sleep mattress that cools us. And I sleep in the summer at -3, which is like kind of cool. And we wake up to an iPhone alarm, and then we blast electronic music the second we get up. And that's basically, we get up at 6. So that's the routine.
Wow. That is quite a routine. Quite a routine. So here's what I like about that routine is there's several things in it that I completely disagree with, but
Tell me.
It works for you. So I'm happy that some of that stuff works well for you, but I could pare that down by about half, and I could get you sleeping just as well. So we'll work on that together. Maybe we'll do a follow-up where we talk all about how I change you and your partner's sleep.
I'm so excited. What an honor. Yeah. So
it would be my absolute pleasure.
But I would say I sleep very well. I'm very happy with sleep.
I think you do too.
But I do want to get my HRV up during sleep. Yeah. That's a goal. Yeah.
I can talk to you about that as well.
Yeah.
So everybody, this has been extraordinary. Dr. Casey Means, thank you for all the time that you've spent with us today. We absolutely 100% appreciate it. How can people find you? How can people get all of your good information, join the club that you belong to? Like, where do they go?
So the best place is caseymeans.com. That's where you can link out to everything, my newsletter, all my socials. And then Good Energy is on Amazon, small bookstores, everywhere books are sold. And then if interested in the continuous glucose monitor, that's levels.com.
So everybody needs to write all that down. Okay. Obviously there's going to be links below, and we're going to have a great big picture of the book and all that kind of good stuff. But people need to understand, like, this is the blueprint. This is the guide. We've given it all to you. Now you got to go and do it. And we're going to make it super easy to find. Dr. Casey Means, thank you so much, Case. This has been amazing, as always. I love our conversations. And I want to tell you that I think you represent the light that is so important to you.
Thank you. That means
You're
so
welcome.
much. And I feel the same way about you. Thank you. Thank you for spreading light. And thank you for this wonderful time to hang out and hopefully create something valuable for your audience. So,
we will. Don't you worry. And you won't get rid of me that easily. Everybody, Dr. Michael Bruce, Dr. Casey Means, we're wishing all of you some sweet dreams and some good energy.